Since completing Dawn Trail last year, I, like many of you, have had many lore questions on my mind, and chief among them is you. Mr. Great Serpent, how are you even possible? I was going to let the story play out, and let Creative Studio 3 answer the question. However, 7.1 didn't even reference it, and it looks like 7.2 is going to be the same. So I'm going into full theory mode, so let's see what we come up with. Now, the title of the video is The Mystery of Tender Valley, and the Valley has posed 3 questions.
Number 1. Why does the architecture of this place look like Ronka on the first? Number 2. Why do they have soulkin that are only found around Ronkan ruins, again on the first? Number 3. How or why is there a great serpent of Tural, when we have only seen evidence of them on the first?
Oh, that's Namingway, by the way. He got fed up with not narrating and he wanted to pitch in.
I am the great naming way of my elemental.
Yeah, thanks Namingway, we gotta move the video forward. To better answer these questions, we first need to lay the groundwork. Let's rewind the clock. We are nearing the end of the Rite of Succession, helping Wook the Kitten to become Queen of the Pride Lands. This last leg to find the City of Gold leads us to the Skydeep cenote, which was once home to the Yokhui. We venture through the ruins of their quarries and temples, encountering many of their leftover living works and vessels. The vessels were of particular interest to me, as Ronka created similar creatures to serve as guardians, and were in fact some of the first stone familiars they created. On my first encounter, I brushed this aside and proceeded forward, mainly because Uroliths are not that uncommon. We have a few examples of them in Eorzea. Upon defeating the main firearm, the way to the City of Gold lays open and...
What the heck are they doing here?
Good question. The soulkin that stands before us is called the Skydeep Packer, but we know them better as a Ronkan doll, Ronka's most iconic stone familiar, which can be seen wandering the Raktika Greatwood, guarding sacred Ronkan sites. And aside from their coloration, they're pretty much identical. Their blue coloration could be explained as electro-corruption, as the substances spread from the portal deeper within, consuming much of the Yokhui architecture. On the subject of architecture, the caves deeper in where the portal is remind me of the caves below Kutani Ravel. Bit of a stretch, I know, but I just found it interesting that both of these cultures valued building such elaborate structures deep underground. Closing in on the portal, we come across a great Yokhui temple site, mostly consumed by Electrope, again guarded by vessels and packers. As for Maul's skull, well, Namiwe?
Oh, sorry, I got nothing to add.
It seems to be a Yokhui creation, used for quarrying according to its lore. We have seen only one other creature in this game use this NPC model, that being Titan's gigantic form in the Eden Raid series. Fast forward to after the events of the 7.0 MSQ, and we encounter a Sharlayan scholar seeking to unravel the mysteries of Tender Valley.
Aren't we all, mate?
Deep within the valley is what remains of a Yokhui civilization, built centuries ago during their northern campaigns. At the center of this is a mysterious temple that stands apart architecturally from everything else. According to Yokhui history, when they first marched into this valley, they encountered the remains of an ancient temple. When they entered and reached its steepest point, they encountered the Great Serpent of Tural. Since the Yokhui already revered serpents, they treated this one with full reverence, worshipping it almost like a god. They built the city we see around this temple to keep it and the Great Serpent safe, and offered the serpent prayers for protection. This city is also a significant departure from traditional Yokhui construction methods, the aqueducts being a prime example. Regardless, both would be abandoned in the following centuries, due to the sickness that killed 9 out of 10 Yokhui. Within the temple itself, we see many similarities to Kutani Ravel. The defenses, for example, are identical, only the icons the statues depict are different, with these ones showing the great serpents. The symbols and writing at both locations also differ, but both structures do share the use of an emerald substance in their construction. Now onto the constructs. As seen in Skydeep Cenote and the Tender Valley temples, both locations have similar soulkin such as the altars and packers, which are pretty much identical to the Ronkan doll. Then you have other soulkin like the orbs, which are only found in one other location in FF14.
Come back to them later, I've something to add on that.
And we can't overlook the Yokhui vessels, which are a unique standalone not seen in Ronka either, and bear striking resemblance to the Allegan nodes, but I'm not gonna read any more into that connection. Last but certainly not least, we have the Attestant, standing guard outside the Great Serpent's chamber. This is an important one, as we see an identical soulkin called Lozatil in the Crotani Ravel. Lozatil itself, either this one or a similar soulkin, was used by the Ronkan Emperor long ago to defeat the Great Serpent of Ronka, and seal the serpent away in a large crystal in Raktika Greatwood. It's interesting to see the very creature that defeated the Great Serpent of Ronka guarding the Great Serpent of Tural, ensuring it remains in slumber. That leads us to the star of the show, the Great Serpent of Tural. It's easily the largest serpent we have encountered, and we can surmise based on the fight that there are other serpents in this chamber as well. We can assume the Great Serpent of Ronka looks similar to this one, but with a different headdress.
You look amazing, by the way.
And that's pretty much everything we know in current lore. But it is enough, however, to conclude that there is or was a connection between these civilizations that are literally worlds apart. What we don't know is how or why. I do have a theory, however. I explored many ideas. The Asians, rift travel.
Don't forget the Allegans.
As interesting as that is, they tend to be the catch-all of anything we can't explain, and frankly so are the Asians. No, my theory goes a bit deeper, so pick up that cup of tea and take a sip. Let's get into it. The serpent, the ruins, and the knowledge of these constructs date back to ancient Aetheris, long before the Sundering. Honestly, after giving it a lot of thought, this was the most plausible explanation I could come up with. Let's go back over 12,000 years to unsundered Aetheris. We know that the stewards of the star were the ancients, who existed across the world and centered their civilization around the great city of Amarot. But they were not the only race to call Aetheris home. Many times during the story do we see and hear mention of the lesser races of Aetheris. Intelligent humanoids, who are the unsundered ancestors of the races that inhabit the Source and Reflections today. It makes sense that these races would have their own cities, cultures, and religions, being able to freely grow and thrive under the protection of the ancients. When the Sundering occurred, these lesser races were also sundered, with their souls being divided between the Source and its reflections just as the remaining ancients were. As for their cities, temples, and other structures, they would be largely intact, displaced across the Source and reflections, like the ruins of Amarot and the other ancient structures. Now true, we have only seen ancient structures on the first, but I'd be willing to bet good gill if you sailed far south of Eorzea and searched the ocean floor, chances are high ancient ruins are there. This would explain how both Ronka and the temple the Yokhiwi found share so many similarities, even down to the constructs within. Lore tells us these soulkin were first created by Ronka, but perhaps they were based on ancient pre-sundering constructs. Now, what does this mean for the Great Serpent of Tural? I now view this creature and others like it as being similar to ourselves. Before the Sundering, a Great Serpent existed, and it was sundered like all other life on this star, with its soul being divided across Source and Reflections. The Great Serpent of Tural is this serpent's Source incarnation, 7 times rejoined. Maybe that explains how it could manifest itself at such scale.
It's time. Talk about the orbs now.
Oh yeah, thanks bud. I have another theory to back this up as well. We have another theory to back this up.
Thank you.
Remember the orbs from the Tender Valley Temple? These are a unique soulkin that we have seen just one other time on Mare Lamentorum. These creatures are known as Panapits, and they can trace their origins to ancient Aetheris. They are also classified as creations, meaning they were born using creation magic. Now here's the lore from the Eorzean Encyclopedia. The Panapit arose when an eccentric creator, stationed at the Teutonic Horns, attempted to crossbreed Yggdrans with other plant species. This particular result of said experimentation initially lacked a purpose to justify its existence, but the Bureau or the Architect accepted the concept's registration once its utility as a tool for surveillance was recognized. The Watcher would later introduce Panapits to the Moon to take advantage of this very function. This is where it ties into the Ronka and Tender Valley civilizations. If we go with the theory they were once a lesser race and civilization on ancient Aetheris, it's possible the ancients used the Panapit to spy or even keep tabs on these races. This is how the lesser race became familiar with the concept, creating soulkin based upon them much later on. So what do you think? Could this explain the mystery of the Great Serpent of Tural, the temple, and the soulkin? If you have an alternate theory, I'd love to hear that as well. Maybe all of this is merely the first stones being laid on a path to a future expansion, where we explore more of the mysteries of ancient Aetheris. Or maybe what Zetchian, the Sarlian archaeologist, said is true. Perhaps there is some all-powerful keeper of whispers peering through the veil, or both source and reflection were once connected by a planar fissure, one where people could freely pass between worlds. I hope we find out soon, as this is a subject I'd love to explore in the main story.
Okay, video over, pay me my guild and Pokemon cards.